I'm from a small town just right outside Lafayette, Indiana. Um, just probably pretty average middle-class family. My mom's a school teacher. My dad's a wildlife biologist, works for the state's Department of Natural Resources. I have a sister who's 2 years younger than me. I have a brother who's about 3.5 years younger than I am. Um, Lafayette's, I don't know, relatively, I guess, average sized town. Certainly not a big city, but it's not tiny. My parents were both, hard workers. They, disciplined me, my brother, sister, and I, pretty well. And my brother has stayed in the Lafayette area. He is an ag systems guy. He got his degree from Purdue, and works there, near home. And then my sister's in the Army as well. She is an adjutant general officer. I guess she's a captain now. And then she's actually currently in Kuwait. The nearest military base that at least hasn't been shut down is probably down here in Kentucky, Fort Knox or Fort Campbell. There may be a couple smaller Air Force bases up there. Both my grandfathers grew up on farms during World War II. They had farm deferments, so they did not serve overseas in World War II. And my dad had a high draft number in Vietnam. My parents' siblings were just too young for Vietnam, and so there's no military in my family at all. I really enjoyed the outdoors. Really enjoyed fishing. My dad's a wildlife biologist, like I said, so he likes the outdoors. He likes to hunt and fish. Enjoyed sports. My brother, sister, and I, we always played baseball, softball, or football or basketball. We played outside a lot when we were young. My parents probably had about 10 acres of land. 8 of it was probably woods, and so we ran around the woods a lot and built forts, played in the creek. In school, I really enjoyed like the science side of things. Really enjoyed history. Was never really a big fan of reading, lit, anything like that. So not usually a big art fan while I was younger. So. I guess it's kind of hard for me to pinpoint maybe when I first decided. Like I said, I really always enjoyed history. My mom was a big reader, and so she always took us to the library when we were younger. And while, just for some reason, I just really enjoyed reading military history while I was younger. I don't know why. And, I always, enjoyed that history and everything, but I always did well in school. I always wanted to go to college. And I don't know, maybe I was in middle school at some point, someone said, hey, have you ever thought of going to one of the military academies? And at that time I didn't know what they were, and just once it was explained to me, I kind of just understood that you're in the military, but you're going to college while you're there. And when you're done with college, you owe the Army, Navy, Air Force some time. And so, I just started to consider that. I felt that growing up, Purdue University is right there in Lafayette, and so, it's a good school, but being right there, it didn't really kind of have the luster, I guess. It didn't, and so, kind of just felt like I wanted to be out of Indiana, and I just needed to, go somewhere else. So I didn't really, know what I was getting myself into, but I ended up going to West Point, and that's kind of what drove me to the military, I guess. Well, kind of like I said, wasn't 100% sure what I was getting into. I honestly didn't know what an officer in the military was at all, or really, I guess, fully understand that. You show up and you just have to report by a certain time, and they take you to the football stadium, and once you get inside, I don't know, they bring you in blocks of like 50. I don't remember. And you're sitting there, and my mom and dad, brother, sister, and my girlfriend were all there, and they give kind of the standard speech, about how this is what you're going to be, this is what you can look forward to, I guess, or what have you, for the next 4 years. You should all be proud you're here. And then they're like, you have 60 seconds to say, goodbye. So, I remember hugging everybody, and I remember my dad tearing up a little bit. And then, they march you across the football field, you go under the bleachers, and, it goes from there. It's just a whirlwind day of getting uniforms and everything issued to you, and signing things, and taking an oath, and, just learning how to march. I mean, by that night, you march in a, I guess, parade, if you will. So, your parents can see, obviously you get your hair cut, learn how to put your uniform on, meet your squad leader, and, just all sorts of stuff like that. So it's a pretty intense day. You're in a company, about 120 other cadets, probably evenly spaced, evenly distributed throughout the different classes. So I probably had 28 to 30 freshmen in my company, and you just have all these additional duties to do. And in addition to going to class, so you go to class from, I don't know, 8 to 3 or 4, and then you either have to play an intramural, or you're practicing parades or drill, or just kind of things like that. And then you go to dinner, and then you're studying at night, or doing the duties that you have. Just kind of goofy stuff like delivering laundry to the upperclassmen, things like that. So there's always pressure put on you by the upperclassmen to learn this history or knowledge of West Point, and so you get really tight with those freshmen that are those other plebes, I guess, that are there in your company with you. And after your first year, you move to another company, but you're always really close with those guys from your first year. And I still talk to several guys that I was with my first year and that I graduated with, but just kind of a bonding experience. And I just remember being tired a lot. I don't think you have to pick a major until, I don't know, your second or third year, but I'd always loved science, and just decided to major in chemistry. Well, they had a degree called chemistry and life sciences. I probably had about 40 other classmates in that major. West Point allows about 2% of its class to go to medical school, and so that's kind of their pre-med program. And when I started there, I really had no desire or intention to, of going to medical school or anything like that. So, like I said, I never really thought about it, but being with those guys in class all the time, all those guys that are kind of focused that way, you start to think about it. I mean, like, hey, everybody else is doing this. Why am I in this group, and why am I majoring in this, but not looking in that direction? And so, I started to look at it a little bit, and you have to apply for one of these slots. You have to apply to medical schools, and I started to do that, and then, I don't know, it kind of woke me up a little bit. I just realized, maybe this, I think I'm just kind of following the crowd here. I'm not sure I want to do this. And so, I started thinking, did I really come to West Point to go straight to medical school? You incurred a pretty serious obligation. If you went to civilian school, it was 4 more years. If you went to the military school, it was 7 more years, on top of the 5 you already owed for West Point. So I was looking at 9 to 12 years in the Army, and so just decided at that time wasn't really what I wanted to do. And so, starting spring break your junior year, you could have a car there. You couldn't have a car before that, and so you could leave and go places on the weekends without having to pay a taxi or borrowing somebody's car. You were allowed to have like a refrigerator in your room, just things like that. And so it was just much more laid back. A lot of the instructors, a lot of the officers and NCOs there, you got a little more respect from them. I mean, they respected all the cadets, but you just because you were in that position and getting ready to graduate and go out and be a lieutenant in the Army, but you also had more responsibility being a 4th year, because it was structured like the military. The 4th year students were the officers that were running, the companies and the battalions there. I kind of compared West Point to still being in high school. I had 1 hour classes, 7 hour blocks a day. I switched classes, and they fed me breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I didn't have to worry about that. They do your laundry for you. It's like just like my mom did my laundry in high school. So, I lived in the barracks. So, a lot of the just getting out and, having your own place and, kind of fending for yourself that went with college. I didn't really experience that. And so, they kind of had those experiences. They were always going out having a good time on the weekends where, my first and second year, we usually had stuff going on Saturdays, and, Sunday we would just study and, start the week over. It's not like we were leaving post to go do anything. So, I guess those are kind of some of the big differences. But, personality-wise, I guess, I didn't really notice any conflicts or anything like that, any differences like that between, the friends from high school that I still talk to and myself. So, I took everything I was doing at West Point, everything I was doing in the officer basic course seriously, but, it was still I was still with my buddies from when I was in West Point in college. I was still with my friends there. Some of them were still in the officer basic course with me, so, we were still kind of having fun and goofing around and just, kind of like, I guess, a last hurrah before we were going off and separating to our units throughout the Army. And so, still really didn't think I was going to a unit in Anchorage, Alaska, Fort Richardson. I was excited about going to Alaska. It was a place I really wanted to go, but it was a very small unit up there. Kind of in the back of my mind, I'm thinking there's no way this unit's deploying anywhere. And so, I was pretty carefree until I found out that we were actually deploying, and then, it just was like, this is for real now, and I'm going to have 40 guys in my platoon here, shortly, that I'm going to be responsible for, for them, in a combat zone. So. I got to Alaska maybe beginning of October of 2003. My unit was the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment. It was a standalone airborne infantry battalion in Anchorage at Fort Richardson. I initially was going to drive up, but while I was in OBC, since I found out they were deploying, the personnel officer said, no, you don't have time to drive or take your leave en route. You need to fly up here. And so I drove my truck home from San Antonio, left it in Indiana, and then flew up to Alaska. I was going to be the medical platoon leader, which is kind of an interesting job. It's one of the special platoons in the headquarters company with the scouts, the support platoon, the mortars. The med platoon leader, you have your platoon leader responsibilities, and you're in charge of all these medics, but you have no medical training. It's your job to coordinate and track evacuations and know how to properly, place the medical assets so that everything's covered appropriately, so you don't have a unit that's out there without proper medical coverage, I guess. And so there's that aspect. So, I was responsible for making sure they were trained and things like that. But then I also kind of had a staff job on battalion staff, where when the battalion staff was planning operations, I was in there and, like I said, just kind of coordinating the medical coverage, if you will, for the operation and what the evac routes and plans were and where the physician, the PA, and all the medical assets were going to be. And so, I had a rough idea of what I was going to be doing, just from what I learned in the officer basic course, and showed up to my unit in Alaska. Once I found out I was going to Afghanistan, I called a couple of my buddies and told them, and one of them had gotten a little handbook about the country that he sent me in the mail. He is an infantry officer. So he's still in the military, and he had gotten it at his officer basic course and sent it to me. And so I had gone through that. It gave a little brief history maybe, and talked about a lot of cultural stuff in there and things like that. But as far as the operations that were going on over there, I didn't know a whole lot, because I basically missed, from the day the unit found out they were deploying, I missed all the unit's buildup because I was still in training, and so when I showed up to Alaska, they were getting ready to leave in like 2 weeks, and so I missed a lot of that, all the training classes and things like that for building up. I mean, I had just turned 23. I mean, when I first got to Alaska, I was obviously a second lieutenant. There might have been a couple other senior first lieutenants, but by the time we got to Afghanistan, they had all been promoted to captain. So there was a while in that battalion I was the only lieutenant, and so I was about as chariot as they come. So
what was that feeling like?
It was pretty intimidating, for sure. All these guys had come to, all these young captains and senior lieutenants had come to this unit in Alaska together and all growing up there, and then this outside brand new lieutenant shows up from the officer basic course. I've never done any training with them. I didn't go to any pre-deployment exercises or anything, and so there was a couple guys that maybe knew I went to West Point and they had been West Point grads, and so they were kind of friendly to me, but I really didn't have even time to meet or really get to know anyone before we went to Afghanistan. They actually left me back in Alaska for 2 weeks to get all my stuff settled while they flew to Bagram and got things set up. And so, I didn't meet anyone. I didn't know anyone's name hardly, and it was very intimidating. It's called Forward Operating Base Salerno. It's near a town called Coast. It's in a province, I don't know, that's right on the Pakistan border. I mean, our FOB was probably 15 to 17 kilometers from the border. It took us 2 days to drive there from Bagram. At the time, our battalion commander had decided that it was best to travel at night, and so I told you I had stayed behind for 2 weeks, so I flew into Afghanistan, and I had just been on a however many hour flight it takes you to get from Anchorage to Germany to Bagram, and I get off the plane, and my platoon sergeant wasn't even there. He had gone ahead to the forward operating base to set things up. So one of the treatment squad leaders grabs me and was like, "Hey, we're leaving tonight and driving to, ground assault convoy. We're driving down to Salerno." I was like, "Okay," and so I went and drew all my ammunition. I went and sat in a couple meetings with the staff, and I didn't know any of the planning that had gone on. My treatment squad leader's like, you're going to be sitting here in the Humvee, and I'm driving, and go get some sleep because we're leaving it when it gets dark. So I I had slept most of the plane ride over there, so at the time I'm wide awake and certainly nervous, just because I hadn't been in there for any of the planning for this convoy down to Salerno, and I didn't even know all my guys, all the soldiers in my platoon. I didn't even know all their names. I hadn't even met all of them before, and so I was wide awake, and I remember we're rolling out of Bagram right away, and someone has an AD with a saw, and burst of small arms fire goes off, and so it was an interesting.
What were you thinking at that point?
At that point my adrenaline was going pretty good, and I was pretty alert, and just trying to remember everything that this treatment squad leader had told me. What Sergeant Rick had told me, before I got in the car or in the Humvee with him, and just making sure I had all my stuff straight. And it was pretty warm when I got there, and so I just had my desert camos on, and I maybe had a long sleeve, like Under Armour type shirt underneath that, and we start rolling out of Bagram and get going, and it's freezing cold, and all my snivel gear's in the back in my bag, and after a while, I'm just exhausted. I'm starting to get jet lagged really bad, and vehicles in Alaska have something called an Arctic heater on them, and I'd never seen one before, but my platoon sergeant, the treatment squad leader, was trying to tell me how to turn it on and to warm the place up. They had taken they were all soft-sided Humvees. We had one company that had up armor Humvees at the time, and everyone else was in a soft-sided Humvee. So they had taken all the doors off, and so I just remember being cold. I remember being really tired, doing everything I could to stay awake, and keep Sergeant Rick awake. And you'd be driving down the road, and it'd be countryside. There'd be nothing, and then you'd go through this village, and everyone comes out of their. I mean, it's the middle of the night, but people are coming out of their house to watch you go by, and you see guys standing there. I mean, they're militia guys, or they allowed everyone in Afghanistan to keep an AK-47, so there'd be guys standing there with an AK-47. It's just kind of nerve-wracking. And so we stopped at daylight and rested, somewhere halfway there, I guess, and took off again that night and got to Salerno. And like I said, my platoon sergeant was there and had set some stuff up ahead of time, but nothing really happened on that convoy. They'd been shipping all of our containers. We called them tricons, or like short shipping containers, with jingle trucks. They're just local national trucks they hire to drive all their stuff down there. And they'd ambushed a couple of those jingle trucks and pushed our tricons off into a wadi. And so we stopped halfway there, and they were trying to recover them. And but I don't remember if the RPG had detonated inside the tricon, or if they weren't sure. And so they fiddled. We sat around for a while, and they fiddled around with it. And then they decided to leave it. They were going to come back for it later. But that was, so it ended up being a pretty uneventful ride down there, but certainly pretty nerve-wracking for, I mean, I hadn't even been in Afghanistan for 24 hours, and I'm sitting in the passenger seat of a Humvee in the middle of the night, freezing my tail off. Didn't even I didn't know any of my guys' names or anything like that, so it was pretty scary. My platoon never left altogether. Obviously, I had line medics. Every infantry platoon had a line medic, so there's 17, 18 of my guys right there. And then I had treatment squad leader, the treatment squad, I had the evacuation guys, and we quickly realized that the kind of concept of medical coverage that I had been taught and that everyone had been doing for the past however many years was completely obsolete there. They had a reserve forward surgical team there, and so all the trauma that came into the FOB, to the forward operating base, went to the forward surgical team. And so really our battalion aid station didn't do any good there. We saw the sick call to start with, and so we started realizing was that we needed to push our medical assets out on these patrols and out on these big operations to so they could be more useful to the unit. And so we would make teams around our physician and around our PA, and then they would each have an NCO and two other medics, and they would go out on on patrols, probably with about a company size unit. And so I would just pick one of those teams to go with usually, and go out with them. So sometimes I would ride with them. Sometimes if we were doing like a medical assistance mission in a village or something and we had a lot of extra medical supplies, I would catch a ride with somebody else. But I would just I would go out with them and ride around. So they wouldn't let us treat local nationals with U.S. supplies, and so we found some program where we could get money and we would go buy a bunch of medical supplies that were made in Pakistan or whatever and take that out with us. And so once the infantry company had gone through and decided that the village was, they had searched the village and done whatever they wanted, they had talked to the elders and I guess deemed it friendly or whatever you want to say, then they would allow us to maybe provide medical care to some of the locals. And we would do that. We would cordon off an area because a lot of times they'd see it. We kept our crosses in on our ambulances and on our vehicles, that way they didn't know, immediately that we were medical people, because we had a tendency to get a kind of a crowd around us, people looking for things. And we'd tell them we wanted to see the women and children first. If not, you just get a line of middle-aged men lining up to get medical care, and I always enjoyed, seeing the kids come out and one see that they could get care, because you'd see, obviously their health care isn't very good, and you'd see, a lot of neglect, with the kids and everything, and so I enjoyed that part of it. They would bring us things that couldn't be fixed sometimes, and we'd try to explain to them that we couldn't do it, and then there would just be routine, colds, things like that. But we had a boy come out that had polio when he was younger or whatever, and was on crutches and couldn't really get around too well. One that really stands out to me is there was a little girl that had fallen down a well and broken some bones, and they wheeled her out to us on a wheelbarrow, and she had this splint that forced her legs wide open, and they had left a catheter in her to make it easier on her parents to go, so she could just use the restroom through that catheter, and they didn't have to carry her out anywhere. And it was just, I remember her just being filthy dirty and just bouncing around in this wheelbarrow, and that someone brought her out to us. But I enjoyed those, but then there were other times when we would be out doing patrols and things where it was much more tense, or it wasn't just kind of a random go to a village. There was actually, we would have intelligence that there was somebody or something in the village that we were interested in, whether it be a weapons cache or some person we've been looking for, and we really had more of a purpose, and we would just go straight to that village. And when that was the case, we always sent those little trauma teams out, and we would stand by while the infantry guys did their thing, and then if there was a casualty of any sort, we would treat them and call in the evac, and if not, we'd just turn around and go back. So I never took my weapon out and fired it. I had medics in my platoon that fired their weapons, but as medics, you just kind of have a different mission, and then as being the medical platoon leader, I was, you'd be thinking about things like where you collecting casualties, or evac and things like that, and you just kind of left the shooting up to the infantry guys. That's what they do, and so you would just seek cover somewhere. And to me, it was amazing how my training and my soldiers training kind of took over, and you did your job, and then it wasn't until, for me at least, afterwards that I would kind of feel just feel kind of, I don't know, jittery or nervous about it, and but while it was going on, it didn't really bother me too much, I guess. It was just kind of you just did what you're supposed to do. Sometimes other units would come down and operate out of our forward operating base. We'd get ranger companies and platoons, special forces units would come out of there. So one night we got a call that they called them other coalition forces, but it was the Ranger Battalion company that was the Ranger company that was there, had casualties as a mass casualty, so it overwhelmed the forward surgical team's operating tables. And so it's dark, my guys are down at the forward surgical team waiting for the helicopter to come in, and then they were going to go out to the landing area and get the casualties off the helicopter, bring them to the forward surgical area, and then just, start the triage and get those guys going. And we're standing outside the forward surgical team, and there's kind of these rumors about one of the guys that's coming in on this bird is Pat Tillman. And my guys, I was vaguely familiar with who he was and his story, and they open up the back of the ambulance, and they pull 3 casualties out, and they go into the forward surgical team into the triage area, and I'm standing there, and I watch him pull Tillman out of the back of the ambulance, and we're following him around to this area where they had set up to I guess basically as a makeshift morgue. And I remember the guys from his unit taking over and telling us, hey guys, get out of there. And so once you kind of hear in the media later what went on with all that, that really kind of sticks with you, what you saw that night. Just, I guess, my soldiers, my platoon, how well they performed, when we had casualties. A lot of times the forward surgical team was really good about when we would have mass casualties that were from outside units that were coming into our FOB. They would let our soldiers come down and assist in the triage and the treatment and things like that, and just how well they did and things like that. What else that stands out about it? I just, I feel like I grew up really fast. I told you I went in there, just being, the youngest guy. I mean, only lieutenant once we got there, and not having a clue, and just how quickly I figured out what was going on, and kind of built relationships with other officers and with the guys in my platoon. So that really sticks out to me. And then certain instances where one time down at the forward surgical team, I had a soldier who was, been in the OR with the forward surgical team for like 3 or 4 hours working on a guy, and I remember he was an Afghani guy, and the surgeons decided, hey, we've done all we can do, and we can't do anything else. And remember how like shaken up that guy was, that he had just spent like 3 or 4 hours trying to help this guy out, and the surgeon was just ready to walk away, and how emotional he kind of got just because he was so invested in that. The treatment of that one guy, even though he wasn't a soldier in our unit. He was a Afghani militia. I came home from Afghanistan in August of 2004. While I'd been in the officer basic course, I was mixed in there with some dentists, and that's kind of when I started thinking about dental school. The application cycle for dental school starts in the spring, and so I started looking into it. And by the time I got back from Afghanistan, by the time I'd taken the test I needed to take, it was too late for me to apply that year. So, I continued to be the medical platoon leader and do things like that. Just all the normal training that goes along with being in the military. We, got to do, a cool training mission in Australia, and just kind of the basic things. And then we, in May, I applied to dental school, so May of 05, and started all that application, already taken my test and everything, and I started applying to get the Army to release me to go to dental school. And at that point, they weren't too fired up about releasing me. They were saying that there was a shortage in, my, specialty in the Army. And so, I had applied to dental school by this point, and I had gotten in to here at Kentucky and, to Michigan, and but then all of a sudden the Army's telling me, hey, we're not going to let you go. And while I was at West Point, I was in the fly fishing club. And so I'm talking to the officer, I guess he was a lieutenant colonel at the time, who was in charge of the fly fishing club, and telling him, hey, Army's not going to let me go. I think he'd written me a letter of recommendation. I said, I appreciate you writing me the letter, but it's just not going to work out this year. And, last thing I knew, he was at like Fort Bliss or in Texas or something like that. And he goes, do you want me to get involved in this? And I'm kind of thinking in the back of my mind, what is this air defense officer that's in Texas going to be able to do for me to get me released to go to dental school? And it turns out he had moved to Washington, D.C. and was doing budget work for like the Surgeon General of the Army. So next thing I know, I got some colonel calling me. He's asking me, what's going on. And, a couple weeks later, I'm released to go to dental school. And so really, I had narrowed it down dental school-wise between Michigan and Kentucky. And Kentucky, the Lexington area, UK, the college in general, really felt a lot like Lafayette did, a lot like having Purdue there. the school here was small. The dental school here, it's not the smallest one, but it's pretty small. And so I think they let about 55 people in a year versus a lot of schools that are like 90, 100, more than that. So that was really attractive to me. And then just, the admissions process here just seemed more friendly to me. And so, I decided I was going to, come here. And so I'm not starting until June of 2006. So I had another, 9 months in the Army where, I was still up in Alaska. I was the HHCXO for a little while, and then they started to stand up a new infantry brigade up there. And so I was working on the brigade staff for a little bit. And then, my wife, I was released from active duty, so I came off active duty and, put into this scholarship program where the military is paying for me to go to dental school. And, my wife and I moved down to Kentucky here. There was the military reason I felt different. And there was my undergrad experience was different than a lot of these guys had. And, I'd really never gone to a civilian, education institution before. So, the admissions, they had all my previous employment history. So they knew that I'd been in the military, that had gone to Afghanistan, I was a veteran, that, had gone to West Point. The guy that interviewed me, knew all that. And so the admissions guy, I think, hooked me up with like an advisor or mentor who had been a Vietnam veteran and had come back and gone to dental school, and then was a colonel, had retired as a colonel in the Air Force as a dentist. And so, I think he was probably pretty sensitive to that, in hooking me up with an advisor like that. And then I guess by nature, I'm a pretty shy, quiet guy. And so, I didn't really broadcast to my classmates, hey, I went to West Point, which that came out quickly because everyone wants to know where you went to undergrad at. And, I didn't really broadcast that I had been to Afghanistan. I was just, it was just a new situation. I didn't know any of these other people. Just kind of, I just kind of wanted to feel things out before. But, once they knew I'd been to West Point and they kind of started asking questions, I'd been in the military, they found out I'd been deployed. And then the guy that interviewed me teaches one of the first year classes, and he broadcasted it to the entire class one day that, hey, Zimmerman here is an Afghanistan veteran. And, so, so right away, everyone that, the half the class that hadn't found out already found out. And, it wasn't that I was trying to keep it a secret or that I was embarrassed by it or anything, but, I'm just a shy guy. I don't really like the, dealing with, I guess, maybe a little bit of the attention that it brought. And so, I guess that's kind of why they're automatically, hey, someone in the military, someone was deployed, you went over there and, you ran around with a rifle and, were killing Afghanis left and right. And, then I'm trying to explain to them what I did as a, medical service corps officer and as a medical platoon leader. And, so, it's kind of difficult to explain to them, what your job was over there. And, they kind of are quick to make assumptions as to what you did. It took me a while to kind of maybe figure out how what that difference was. And, because I always kind of felt, I've made some great friends here at UK and at dental school, but, I'm certainly not like the center of my dental school class, like the social center of my class or anything like that. And, so at first I'm thinking, it's because I'm a little bit older, I'm 3 or 4 years older, I'm married, my wife's had 2 kids while I've been in dental school, so I have 2 daughters now. And, so at first I kind of thought that separated me a little bit. And the more I think about it now that I'm getting closer to graduation and see the way some of my classmates are acting around graduation, is that this is really a very defining experience in their lives, is going to dental school and graduating and becoming a dentist. And, if I didn't want to be a dentist, I wouldn't have gone to dental school. I wouldn't, and it's been a very good experience for me, but, I don't think it's been as maybe defining as my time in the military was and my time, in Afghanistan was. And so we just have maybe some different experiences that are, kind of define who we are and the way we look at things. And so, but and so I think that probably accounts for the big maybe difference between, myself and my classmates is, they're just, most of them are come straight out of undergrad, dental school is what they've been building up for, their whole, educational careers, and they're getting, ready to go out and have a job for the first time and go do something. And, I've already, I was already in the military, I basically had a job for 3 years and an income and, a lot of, different path and, different experiences that defined who I am and, what got me to that point. And so, I graduate in like 3 days here, so, and the Army paid for me to go to school, so I'm going back onto active duty to be a dentist in the military. I owe them time for undergrad, still I owe them time for dental school, so by the time it's all said and done, I'm going to be, 9 or 10 years invested in the military, in the Army. I'm certainly not afraid to walk away from it at that point, but there's certainly some, financial and future considerations to take into account as far as staying in and retiring. Being a dentist in the military, my wife worries that I'll get, deployed again. I don't really sweat that too much. There's one dentist for every 3, 4, 5,000 people, soldiers that are deployed over there. And there's just so few of them that end up back in Iraq or Afghanistan. So that doesn't really worry me too very much. And if it happens, it happens. Again, I realize I'm in the Army and that's what I'm there to do. So, but as far as long-term goals, I just want to. The one thing about the military that I don't like is the constant moving around. And so, now that I have 2 daughters and I'm kind of to the point where I really have the itch to settle down somewhere, and, that may be a little easier to do as a dentist. There may not be moving me around every 3 years or whatever, but, just hope to finish, the time that I owe now to, if I decide to stay longer, to finish that and, to get out and, just settle down somewhere permanently. I grew up, my parents, we lived in the same house for, 18 years. My parents still live there. That's kind of what I'm used to. It's what my wife's used to, and it's kind of what we want for our daughters and everything. And so just, find some place we want to be and, settle down. And if I decide to retire from the military, maybe I'll work as a dentist for a couple days a week. If I decide to get out sooner, maybe I'll work more as a dentist. But